Funding for This Is Nashville comes from you, our listeners, and Music City Prep Clinic, Nashville-based provider for PrEP and offering comprehensive sexual health services in an environment designed to be safe, professional, and shame-free. Learn more at musiccityprep.org.
I'm Khalil Ekulona, and this is Nashville. Electricity is the key to our society and way of life. Cut off the power, and for many of us, our world would stop. It wouldn't end, but there would most certainly be a long pause on how we approached our day. For anyone listening who's ever had the power cut off, you know what I'm talking about. So it is essential that any society, our society, be able to provide power to anyone that wants it at a reasonable price. For Tennesseans and folks from other states, that reasonable price is getting higher and it's climbing. Where is all of our money for electricity going? Well, most of it goes to our electric utility, the TVA, also known as the Tennessee Valley Authority. Our money is paying for new projects as well as some very large executive salaries. To help break all of it down for us, I'd like to welcome two journalists who've been covering the TVA. Jamie Satterfield is a reporter who's been reporting on the TVA since 2008, and Caroline Eggers is WPLN's environmental reporter whose work listeners are very familiar with. Now, This Is Nashville was unable to coordinate a representative from the TVA to appear on today's show. Nonetheless, I'd like to welcome Jamie and Caroline to This Is Nashville. Jamie and Caroline, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Really appreciate you both being here. I want to understand what the TVA actually is, get a framework for the entity. Jamie, what type of entity is the TVA?
The TVA is what we call a quasi-public utility. And what that means is, unlike, say, a Duke Energy in North Carolina, which is a private firm, the Tennessee Valley Authority was created by Congress. And initially it was created to deal with flooding and dams. And then eventually they got into the production of electricity business. And they've been doing that since the 60s. And the reason I point out that it's a quasi-federal, which means that they get some protections as a federal agency and some power that a private utility does not have. For instance, the power of eminent domain. And they also get a lot of deference from regulators because they're considered an arm of the federal government.
Now, is it the largest federal utility in the country?
Yes, it's the nation's largest public utility.
All right. So outside of being the largest, what makes it special?
Carolyn, you want to grab that one? They like to think they're special, obviously, but, they are different in that they do have the power of eminent domain, which means they can take your property. And, of course, they have to compensate you, but it's different than a private company. They also they are operated by a board, but they also have a CEO. They operate not only dams, but coal-fired plants, nuclear plants. They have plants in Alabama, Kentucky, and Tennessee. And so they have a huge impact, one, on the production of electricity, obviously, but also in the production of electricity, they create a lot of dangerous waste. So that's what I would say.
All right. Now, Carolyn, you've been covering the TVA's reluctance to explore, let alone embrace alternatives to fossil fuels like renewable energy. Last week, your recent story on the TVA's quarterly meeting at Lipscomb talked about some of the decisions made by TVA's board. Can you tell us more about what you saw there?
Yeah. So to paint you a picture, a source recently told me that TVA board meetings were intimidating. And now, having gone to these meetings, I can understand why. So last week, the building for the two meetings was guarded by police, and inside, cops basically had like an airport security line. They even confiscated people's water bottles. And there were two meetings. The first is meant for members of the public to talk to the TVA board, and the second is the routine business by the board. During the first meeting, anyone who isn't a journalist is told they can't record inside. And in the meeting room, the board and the CEO sit on top of a platform, and then some of the people who signed up to speak are called upon to take turns.
What was the tone of some of the comments made by members of the public who were there?
Yeah, so a lot of the concerned citizens at the meeting were residents from Cheatham County, where TVA is planning to build one of those 8 gas plants you mentioned. None of the residents wanted the gas plant in their community, and some people spoke passionately. One woman was with her kids, and she cried while pleading with the board to protect the children in the community. So there was a range of emotions represented.
Was anyone there in support of the moves?
Yes, the lineup of speakers was actually pretty stacked with industry representatives and management from local power companies and some of the associations that represent them. There were a few people who specifically advocated for fossil fuel use, and a lot of the people talked in a way that kind of mirrored how TVA communicates ideas.
Anything stand out to you about that time?
Yeah, so the listening session, which that would be the first meeting, is capped at 2 hours. So it did stand out that there were so many energy industry representatives speaking during this meeting. Given that these people have easy access to TVA and its leadership, and after the meeting, I heard from a lot of residents and climate activists who said they had signed up to speak but weren't called on.
Now, I'm a little bit...
And can I...
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry. I wanted to jump in there and say I've covered several of their board meetings and the listening sessions, as it were. And TVA does control who gets to speak. And so what she saw, what that phenomenon of their fans and their supporters getting to speak more frequently than dissenters and just average old citizens, that's typical of how TVA operates.
I'm a little bit baffled. Maybe you both can really help me out here. The TVA is the largest federal utility, and they're sticking with the development of fossil fuel infrastructure rather than look into renewables. Do I have this right? Jamie?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
They one thing is that they always go for the cheapest thing, right? And because renewables there may have to be infrastructure that would change, and there might be extra expense. So I'm not surprised at all that TVA's solution to the coal-fired plants is gas as opposed to renewables. They want to maximize their profits, and that's something that. In terms of this pay of their executives and such, these gas plants are going to mean a lot of money for whoever's building these pipelines, the companies that are building them, and also because it's cheaper than creating renewable infrastructure. That's going to mean more money for TVA. So this is really about money, not what the public wants or needs or what's best for our planet.
I want to get into this executive salaries in a second, but I'm questioning, what about President Biden's pledge to invest in renewable energy if the largest federal utility is sticking with fossil fuels? Can anyone answer that for me?
Well, that's a question that I've had, is given that there's money on the table, that the Biden administration has put money on the table, you would think that would have impacted the decision making. But it's clear to me that TVA decided they were going to go with gas well before this infrastructure bill was even passed. They'd made that decision early. They were slow to announce it to the public. And that's for a reason. I mean, these companies are already out here acquiring land to build these pipelines. So they were never going to be on board with renewables unless they get, they have to be dragged kicking and screaming. Why that is, I don't know, because they certainly don't explain themselves.
Caroline, despite the data showing that fossil fuels have impacted the environment, the TVA is going forward. Has the TVA given you any of their reasoning behind this decision?
Yeah, so TVA's main arguments for adding gas have shifted a little bit since I've come to WPLN, but they've mostly been cost, reliability, and growth. And I will note that experts have rejected all of these arguments, including the cost argument for adding gas to the grid. And it's easy to understand why if you look around the country. This year, 96% of new energy in the US is expected to be renewable, battery, or nuclear. It's really just TVA and some other utilities in the Southeast that are adding the vast majority of gas capacity today.
You know, you also wrote about TVA CEO Jeff Lyash's $10 million salary. How does executive pay come to play on all this?
Yeah, so a recent analysis by the Center for Biological Diversity found that between 2020 and 2023, the top 6 executives collectively made about $3 million from bonuses tied to fossil fuel metrics. And Jeff Lyash made the most with about 1.4 million of those $3 million.
Now, Jamie, you've been covering the TVA for a long time. You wrote about the 2008 coal ash spill in Kingston. You've also covered the nuclear oversight managers who were removed for alerting the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission over safety concerns. Give us your understanding of the TVA as an agency.
Well, you know what my reporting over years now has shown is that they have a terrible record on worker safety and being open to workers being able to raise safety issues, both on the nuclear side and on the coal-fired plant side. You know, they what is particularly in the nuclear side. Because that's, you know, think about that. We surely most people are aware of the 10 Mile Island and the danger that can pose. And they have, I got to say, this TVA has a lot of conscientious, hardworking employees. And but when employees have tried to bring concerns about safety to TVA executives, what typically happens is they get blackballed, they get fired. And or they get laid off in the their contract worker, that sort of thing. They are not amenable to listening to the folks that are actually doing the work.
Now, both of you are on top of their stories. Would either of you say that the TVA is particularly transparent?
They're not transparent at all. And you know, I did a several years of investigation into the Kingston spill, and I can't tell you how many times that in investigating that spill I found where they would alter records. They were supposed to maintain and keep videos of the working conditions out there, and when I started asking for them, suddenly they can't find them. And to this day, they've not explained. And they were under an order, a administrative court order to maintain those. And they simply say, "Oh, they're gone. We don't know where they are." Good luck trying to get. It took some legal action to even get this executive pay out there in the public. They're notorious for a lack of transparency. And they will say they hold public forums for folks. All they are glorified field day looking things. There's or science fair looking things where they have these little poster boards that the public can walk around and see how great TVA is. Good luck at those forums actually getting to communicate with executives at TVA and to get a fair listen at those things.
Now, from what I understand, the board has oversight control of the TVA. Is that right, Caroline?
Yes, I'm going to go back for 1 second. I just wanted to clarify that the report on the top 5 executive salaries, that was based on public information, but TVA doesn't currently disclose the salaries of management beyond the top 5 paid employees.
Okay.
But okay, on to your question. Can you tell me again?
From what I understand, the board has oversight control of the TVA, right?
Yes.
How are
Yes, the TVA board is the main regulator.
how are they appointed?
Board members are selected by U.S. presidents, and then they are confirmed by Congress.
All right. So can you tell us the makeup of the board as it currently sits?
Yes, the board is mostly Biden appointees now, and there are still a few Trump appointees.
All right. So you both have detailed in your reporting some of the problems and issues that are happening at the TVA, from transparency to this continued push against citizens, local officials, and activists' feelings of, going more towards renewable energy. What can the federal government do to change the TVA's plans? Caroline?
Well, the TVA board, being that it's appointed by presidents and confirmed by Congress, they really are supposed to be the main regulator. That's their full job. But there are some options where President Biden could get involved in some of the decisions. But it's a little unclear right now if that's something if that's a path that's going to be taken.
Mm.
And look, if you attend these board meetings on a regular basis, the idea that the board does any overseeing is kind of laughable because it's very staged. All of the executives have their reports and they present their reports, and the board members go, "Oh, you guys are doing so great." And in fact, they gave their authority on this issue of gas plants and what's going to happen with these coal-fired plants. They delegated that to Jeff Lyash directly, very quietly. But I was at the board meeting where that was approved, and that allowed Jeff Lyash to call the shots on what is essentially reshaping how the Tennessee Valley Authority produces electricity, and gave him total control and authority over that. And it's just now sort of come to the surface. I saw a story earlier today, in fact, about that was somehow hidden. Certainly it wasn't made. They didn't put it on their website, but there was a vote. I was there and I saw the writing on the wall when that happened. So that board really, I hate to say it's a group of yes men, but sometimes it feels that way.
Now, okay, so we just understood what the board is not doing. We understood what the federal government can do. Let me ask you this, Jamie. What has the federal government actually done?
Well, I tell you this, very little, especially when you look at the Kingston case and what happened with these workers. I have to remind folks that over 50 of these workers are now dead as a result of the exposure to coal ash at that Kingston spill. And many others are very sick. And OSHA, which we expect to protect our workers, because it was TVA, when they got a radiation complaint saying these fellows are out there working in radioactive material with no protection, OSHA deferred to TVA, didn't even send anybody out there, just picked up the phone and said, "Hey, we got this complaint. I'm going to send it over to you." The EPA, within 2 months of that spill, had ceded authority for the cleanup back to TVA. There's no oversight by the federal government of the Tennessee Valley Authority.
The TVA announced plans for 8 gas plants across their service area, which would mean 160 miles of pipeline for Tennessee. What are the implications of this new pipeline, Caroline? How will it impact Tennesseans?
Yeah, I think, on their latest project for building a gas plant in Kingston, the Environmental Protection Agency wrote some comments about this. And I think they summarized it pretty well in saying that the project, really any of these gas projects, are going to have serious financial, climate, and health risk for everyone in the valley.
Will our power costs get cheaper or will they go up?
It depends who you ask.
What are your thoughts?
Experts are saying right now that the costs are we know that the costs are going up because they're building new capacity, but whether that's between gas or renewables, there has been some question, but most experts today would say that renewables are a better financial decision, not just because of the cost to produce the electricity, but also because gas plants carry some financial risk in that, there might be some decisions to close these plants early, considering climate change in the future. And also, there's some financial risk just because gas prices change. There's volatility in prices.
I want to take a quick second and look at this from the TVA's perspective. What's the argument for following the path of fossil fuels? Jamie?
I'm gonna cede that to Carolyn because I think she's done some recent reporting where she's talked to them about that.
Caroline, give us the TVA's perspective for following the path of fossil fuels.
Yeah, well, like I mentioned earlier, their main arguments have been cost, reliability, and that the valley is seeing unprecedented growth, would be their words.
Final question for you, Jamie. You've been on the beat for a long time. There are two board members whose terms expire in 4 days, Beth Harwell and Brian Noland. What do you hope to see from the new board members who take their place?
I'd like to see real oversight, that instead of getting these canned reports and everybody glad-handed and smiling and slapping each other on the back, that some real hard questions by this board are asked, that they actually maybe go to some of these plants, meet with workers, see what conditions are, meet with the community around these various plants. In addition to this idea of gas versus renewable and climate risk, what we're also not talking about is that when they close these coal-fired plants, they are leaving pits full of radioactive coal ash waste, and that's all over the state. And the threat to groundwater, if they're storing it dry, some of it's dry, some of it's in pits, but their storage methods put community members at risk. This stuff gets in the air, it gets in the water. So I would like to see board members who actually went out and talked to the community to see what the community folks are facing and what they want to happen in their communities.
I want to thank Jamie Satterfield, veteran journalist who's been covering the TVA for 16 years, and Caroline Eggers, WPLN's environmental reporter. You can find her latest story on the TVA at WPLN.org. Jamie and Caroline, thank you both for being here, and thank you both very much for your reporting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We're going to take a short break. When we return, we'll talk with two climate activists about what the environmental changes they want to see happen at the TVA. And as always, you can join the conversation and tweet us at This Is Nashville. We'll be right back.
Funding for This Is Nashville comes from you, our listeners, and Music City Prep Clinic, Nashville-based provider for PrEP and offering comprehensive sexual health services in an environment designed to be safe, professional, and shame-free. Learn more at musiccityprep.org.
I'm Khalil Ekulona, and this is Nashville. Welcome back as we continue our conversation on the federal utility the Tennessee Valley Authority, or the TVA. Now, before the break, we learned about the TVA, how it's structured, who has oversight over the powerful entity. We also got a glimpse of the executive pay structure. In addition, we learned that in 2024, as the country claims to be focusing on renewable energy, the TVA is driving forward in the pursuit of fossil fuel development. Now, you're not going crazy. Those are two very opposite directions. And only one direction will help us as the climate changes. So here with me to talk about why they disagree with the TVA's fossil fuel development are Tracy O'Neill, member of the Citizens for Preserve Cheatham County, and JT Neal, decarbonization advocacy consultant for the Southern Alliance for Clean Energy. He's also with Sunrise Nashville as official organizer. Tracy, JT, thank you both so much for being here. Welcome to This Is Nashville.
Thank you for
having us. Yeah.
Really appreciate you both being here. So I do want to start off by learning a little bit about you both and discover why you've become advocates or a part of the movement for a cleaner environment. Tracy, tell me a little bit about yourself. Where are you from?
Sure. I'm a resident of Cheatham County. I live just a few hundred feet away from the new proposed methane gas plant that TVA is proposing. I've lived in Cheatham County for more years than I care to admit. I've raised one child there. He grew up, went through, elementary, middle, and high school, graduated from Cheatham. I've got a little one now who's growing up through the Cheatham school district. And this plant is going to be in the middle of 5 schools. All 5 of our schools, elementary, high school, middle school, this plant is within 5 miles of all of those schools.
Let me ask you this. Have you always been interested in the conservation movement?
Conservation, sure. I think it should be a concern of everyone. Biodiversity is important. The environment's important. Certainly over the last year, I've become far more aware of what's been taking place and where the Tennessee Valley Authority is failing the general public.
So what was the turning point for you? When did that interest turn to involvement?
Oh, certainly when they decided to put a methane plant in the middle of Cheatham County. That was when it was, oh, wait a minute, you're going to do what? Who's doing this? What? So it was a lot of knee-jerk reactions. But of course, as you get more aware of things, it's just a natural progression to get more involved.
Now, JT, give us a little bit about your background. You're a native Nashvilleian, right?
Yep, born and raised.
So
I went for college, I went to Vanderbilt, and people would ask me where I'm from, and I would point over to the hospital. And I'd be like, I was born in that building. But I'm a native Nashvilleian. I got involved because I always had an interest in the environment. And so I literally searched Google one day. I was like, let me find somebody. I care so much about this. Let me see what can I do? And so I found Sunrise, and it was more focused on the people who are impacted by climate and people who are impacted by environment. So it's funny, I never really thought of myself as an environmentalist, but I have always considered myself someone who cares a great deal about people. So I'm in this fight because my geeky, nerdy pursuits put me on the path of being like, I know how electricity is made because it's very interesting. And then I find that TVA, the people who make my electricity, are doing something that doesn't really make that much sense, especially if I'm not an expert. I won't claim to be an expert on all of the finer details and points about this plant versus that plant, but knowing enough to know that some things aren't adding up and they don't make sense, and that the only person who can do something about it is me. So,
All right. So tell me a little bit about the Sunrise Movement Club. I mean, what are some of the principles and what do you all do?
Yeah, so I always describe, it's funny you asked, this has actually been a topic of discussion within the national movement. How do we define ourselves to others? But I've always announced what Sunrise is as a youth-led climate justice organization. So again, we love the trees, we love polar bears, but we're more concerned about the people who are going to be impacted by climate change, because the people who are consistently impacted by these sorts of things, they tend to be the people that society has decided aren't worth as much. And so we're opposed to that. And so, we we are we do many different things, but we do consider ourselves a movement. So, yeah.
Tracy, tell me about Citizens for Preserve Cheatham County.
Sure. It's exactly that. It's a citizens group. We settled on the name Preserve Cheatham County. And this, of course, was the culmination of our neighbors, our neighbors and folks in the community getting together to oppose this methane gas plant. So that's where this all started. And what's interesting to me is we were not notified by the TVA of their plans. It was by notification from some acquaintances of mine involved with the Sierra Club that had said, "Hey, Tracy, don't you live in Cheatham County?" I was like, "Yeah." "Where do you know that TVA is about to build a methane gas plant there?" I was like, "Where? What are you talking about?" So their first announcement, they as in TVA, their first announcement was in the Federal Registry. That was their public announcement.
Wow. So when you hear about this from your friends who are affiliated with the Sierra Club, that the TVA is doing something that's directly going to affect your local community, tell me what was going through your mind.
Well, again, the knee-jerk reaction was, this doesn't make sense. We're an agricultural community. There's a lot of farms. There's a lot of homesteads. There is zero industry anywhere near us. I mean, we have industry in Cheatham County, but it's on the other side of the county, getting closer to Nashville. And then, of course, we don't have anything on my side of the county until you start getting up to Clarksville. So this made zero sense to us. We have zoning in place to prevent industry from popping up in the middle of our farms, yet the Tennessee Valley Authority is able to up any sort of local regulations or local zoning, and they can just do whatever they please. They didn't even contact our mayor. They didn't contact anybody in our community, none of our elected officials. They heard about this from our group, who we heard about it through Sierra Club. Not once did TVA reach out to any of us.
Well, has your group attempted to correspond with the TVA?
Oh, yes.
What's that correspondence been like?
I should say we're very appreciative of having the dialogue with the Tennessee Valley Authority. However, it's a lot of lip service from them, in our opinion. I mean, it's great that they have recently hired these new vice presidents of the region, or whatever their titles are, to come out and talk to the community after they started throwing flags and saying, "Hey, wait a minute." So it's fine. We're having conversations with them. Whether or not it's going to actually impact the final decision certainly remains to be seen. But we're engaging with TVA. TVA is not engaging with us.
Now, this is a federal entity where the board are folks appointed by the president. They have the power of administration. But it seems like they're slow to take action.
Yeah, this is actually something that I know I've spoken about with Tracy many times, and anybody else who will listen. I always try to point out when I talk about the board that, number one, the president can't really fire people. If the president, being the chief executive, you think, oh, he can fire people and do whatever. But actually, it usually is a process, right? The TVA board are actually among the few people that the president can full on just be like, you're fired, right? So there is an enormous pressure that the president can exert to say, I appointed you to this board to do this certain thing. However, you're not doing that thing. Do it, or you won't be here, right? And it's one of those things where, in addition to that, there are all these little shades and gradations that murky the water, right? So, for example, when the president nominates somebody to the board, there is a vetting process. And you would imagine that one of the many regulatory authorities, the Department of Energy, EPA, the FBI, any number of the alphabet soup would handle that. But actually, each of the board members is directly vetted and trained and coached on how to go through the nomination process by the TVA. If you're the president and you nominate someone to change TVA, Why is it that for 6-7 months, the only people they talk to from the federal government are the people you want them to change? You want them to change their behavior. That's something that I know for a fact because we've had some communications with the White House that's sort of blown my mind because it makes sense from, a regulatory standpoint. If I'm hiring someone on to regulate this body, they don't need to be surrounded. They don't need to drink the Kool-Aid, as it were. There's nothing about what TVA is doing that you need to be concerned with because I've brought you in to change things. And yet we've seen continuously with the nominees that we've personally, that the Clean Up TVA Coalition and other groups like Sierra Club have, petitioned to get the White House to nominate and petitioned senators and congresspeople to confirm. These people are just surrounded by someone who tells them, well, you have to be concerned about reliability and you have to be concerned about the intermittency, the potential intermittency of renewable energies before anything else. So even though you should know better, you need to listen to me because I'm the only one who actually knows. And so, yeah.
And to kind of follow up on that just a little bit, for the general public who is not regularly involved with the TVA, to try to find any information is next to impossible. Mm-hmm. Say someone from Cheatham County wanted to run for that board of directors. There is no way to find out any information on how to become a board member. They're appointed by the president. Okay, great. How do you get in front of the president? If you don't have connections to some of these larger organizations, but you feel called to service, you feel that, hey, I can make an impact on that board, how do I do it? There's no answer.
If you're just tuning in, this is Nashville, and I'm your host, Khalil Ekulona. We're talking this hour about the Tennessee Valley Authority and their pursuit of fossil fuels. My guests are Tracy O'Neill and JT Neal. Okay, so, people may know about the TVA, but they don't kind of seem overly concerned to take action the way you two have. Why do you think it's that way? JT?
Yeah, honestly, there are a lot of things to worry about, right? And it's one of those things that's the impact is very clear and very tangible. You understand it. But TVA actually fits in this surprising gray area that you don't realize is there, right? It's a federal entity. So it's very much, top of the food chain in terms of governmental action, right? However, we don't actually pay. TVA generates all the electricity around here, everyone in the Valley, Tennessee, and some of the surrounding 7 states. But actually, you don't pay TVA for that electricity. You pay your local power company, who then in turn pays TVA. And so it's one of these things where when you have an electricity issue, when your bill has some issues, you don't go to TVA. You go, to the NES or, anybody else, right? MLGW. And with that, it's very easy to sort of miss, right, that this is going on, right? Like everyone has noticed that rates have gone up. Everybody's power bill has gone up. But it's not your local power company's fault. And so you'll complain to them, and they'll take those complaints and either give them to the TVA or don't. Some are a lot more amenable to doing it than others. And it's this situation where TVA doesn't really have to care, doesn't seem to have to concern. There's not an immediate, the public are getting upset about this. And then you combine that with the fact that in the South, there are all of these issues and all of these problems and concerns that take precedent because of they're more immediate, they're more in touch, right? When there is a problem, when you talk about, education or talk about healthcare, you can go to your Congress, you can go to your state representative, your state senator, your mayor, your city council. You can go to all of these places where you can touch and be tangible and interconnect. But if I want to talk about TVA and I go to my senator or my congressperson, well, there are 15 other things that are probably a little bit more pressing on their mind and my mind, right? So it's something where I don't think people aren't engaging because they can't or they won't. It's just up there hanging, and there are other things right there that you're like, well, I'm already here. I might as well touch and be concerned about.
I mean, I understand that. What we're saying, I often say on the show is the rent is too damn high. People have to worry about housing costs, education, safety, quality of food, and other things. But, I think it's hard for people who live in urban areas to really grasp the impact of environmental decay. You just don't see it very much. However, in rural areas like where you're in, Tracy, you guys see it on a daily basis. Talk to me very briefly about how folks in both communities can visualize and understand the burdens that each is going through.
We definitely need to focus on bridging the divide between the urban communities and the rural communities. So we need to think about the total impacts. When TVA is talking about building these gas plants, here in Nashville, the closest impact that you're going to see is if the board approves the plant in Cheatham County. What does that mean for Nashville? Well, a lot. I mean, we have local growers, right? We're talking about an area that is experiencing growth. Of course it is. But what's more concerning is we're losing farmland. So what does that mean? It means that we are going to increase food instability. And if we're starting to put these polluting plants like a methane plant in the middle of our farms, well, now we have to worry about groundwater contamination, air pollution, particulates landing on our crops. You know, we're not talking about just acres and acres of corn. We've got diversified crops, diversified fruits and vegetables for our farmers markets. But we also have to look at where this gas is coming from. Where is this methane coming from? This is fracked methane gas, and the TVA doesn't want to talk about that because we know, even if you're not involved in the environmental communities, you've heard of the dangers and the impacts from fracked gas. Well, you know, you've got folks up in Pennsylvania that probably have something to say about TVA, you know, expanding the gas in Tennessee, because that gas is probably going to come from Pennsylvania.
Gotcha. Yeah. All right. One last question. I'm going to leave it to you, JT. I've got just under a minute left. You're an activist. I want to ask you the same question that I asked our guests at the end of the previous segment. Considering TVA's perspective, what's the logic behind moving forward with fossil fuels?
It's what they immediately understand. It's something where they know what process to use. They know what issues are going to crop up. And it is far easier for them to simply not have to imagine doing something new versus them doing what it is they've already been doing. Right? Renewables bring all of this new technology and new considerations. And I know the CEO, Jeff Lyash, talks about the interconnections, right? That's their interconnection queue is massive and it's picked up and all these things. And it's like, well, why doesn't TVA why doesn't TVA use imagination to circumnavigate this? And the only answer is because it's easier to just build another gas plant. I know how a gas plant works. I know how to turn it on, turn it off, and what you need.
You can teach an old dog new tricks, particularly when it means they drink clean water. All right. I want to thank my guests, Tracy O'Neill with Citizens for Preserve Cheatham County and JT Neal with the Southern Alliance for Clean Energy and Sunrise Nashville. Again, thank you both for being here.
Yes, thanks for having us.
We have to take one more break. When we come back, we'll learn about a petition from the Black Nashville Assembly that would create a new department in Metro government focused on youth safety. As always, join the conversation by tweeting us at This Is Nashville. We'll be right back. I'm Khalil Ekulona, and this is Nashville. The Black Nashville Assembly was started in 2020 to mobilize and organize Black people to transform Nashville through political engagement. They organize meetings, hold community dinners to watch proceedings of Metro Council, mobilize citizens to vote, and educate people not only about how our local government works, but what people like you and me, how we can get involved. Recently, they've developed a petition for a document they call the Varsity Spending Plan. It calls for serious government investment and increasing youth safety. Here with me to talk now about the Varsity Spending Plan is Erica Perry, Jamel Campbell-Gooch, and Mike Floss, all with the Black Nashville Assembly. Thanks to y'all for being here. Really appreciate you.
Thanks so much for having us. We appreciate you.
Awesome. This is good. Okay, so I want to start by talking about the Varsity Spending Plan. Erica, briefly, where did the idea come from?
So the idea is really built on the work that we've been doing for the last 4 years, and especially goes deeper into the work we've been doing with young people in Nashville around really redefining public safety. Mm-hmm. And so the young people we've worked with in Nashville, in the Middle Tennessee area, have been really clear about really wanting to address gun violence and get to the root causes of that, and have come up with ideas that would help us move towards addressing gun violence violence, reducing that, and create thriving and safe communities for young people and their families. And so the varsity spending plan is a plan to get to the heart of their vision for a Nashville that is safer, healthier, and where they can really live full and beautiful lives.
Now, Jamel, the budget is asking for $10 million in this plan, right?
Yes.
Okay, so give me some of the details about that. What are some of the main pillars that the plan is asking for?
For sure. So it's a spending plan. So whenever our city passes a budget, one of the things that they pass is the mayoral spending plan. So the idea is that if we present a varsity spending plan, it'll make it easier on city council members to amend the budget and put it in the chair's budget. So we have $4 million that is going towards literally community center programming, with the idea of that $4 million can put a person dedicated to restorative justice, like restoring community conflicts in our community centers, which really serve as the ground level of where a lot of our conflicts in the community happen. Also, $4 million to an Office of Youth Safety. That is an office in the mayor's office that is solely dedicated to making sure our young people have the maximum opportunity to live in safe communities. And that is also dedicated towards programming, having a dedicated staff, but really, we wanted to double down on making sure that our young people have opportunities outside of courts, outside of cages, outside of consistently being policed, to actually restore conflict and work proactively to solve gun violence.
Now, Mike, there's also a considerable amount of money allocated in the budget that you all are proposing for restorative justice within schools, right?
Yeah, we want to. A lot of times, we've seen restorative justice be effective, but in the schools currently, there's staff issues somewhat, where they need more people in the schools to be with the students. And the restorative justice person that'll be on staff that doing the best they can, but they oftentimes end up being the ISS teacher, the substitute math teacher, the basketball coach, all these other positions, instead of focusing solely on restorative justice. So to get an additional investment of this money into having someone there that is just doing restorative justice, just working with the relationships and the conflicts happening inside the school, would be extremely pivotal.
Now, tomorrow, listeners, we're going to be doing another episode on restorative justice in education, something that we focused on a lot here at This Is Nashville. Now, $10 million investment. Compared to other metro budget items, it's not that much, but it's also not a very little bit of money. It's some change.
Yes.
Have you all spoken to metro council members to gauge their temperature on this?
Yeah, and so one thing that we are grateful for as the council members we've been able to speak to about the varsity spending plan, and really recognizing that what makes the genius in this is that it was something that has been created through participatory budgeting and through democratic practices by people in our communities, by people who are impacted by gun violence, by young people who are in these schools, by people who live in and around these community centers and go to these community centers. And so I think that, our hope is that council members are really open to the idea of building on the legacy of the restorative justice that's happening in school, because this really complements that by saying, hey, how do we shift the culture of how we deal with conflict in our schools? So it isn't just something that should happen. I just want to name that. The restorative justice we're talking about isn't something that should just happen after a conflict. We're talking about programming during the school year, both during school and after school, where young people can develop the tools and practices to restore relationships and address conflict. Then the other thing I'll name that I think council members, I hope that council members and community members are excited about, is that this Office of Youth Safety that we're talking about is like something that has not been done across the country. We will be the first. And so, we know that Durham, North Carolina, and Washington also have something similar, like an Office of Youth Services. But this is an Office of Youth Safety that is specifically focused on creating a pilot and a program that supports young people in fostering safe communities. I think the other thing I'll name is that it has to focus on what are the root causes of harm in our community and addressing them through systemic policies and programs. And so that is the invitation that we're inviting council members to actually support and pass. And of course, we're asking community members to sign a petition and speak to their council member about the varsity spending plan and the request for $10 million to go to young people, families, neighborhoods, in our schools.
All right. Now, petitions are only strong when you can get people to sign them. Jamel, how can people get involved and sign the petition?
Yeah, so you can go to our website, oursmc.org/VSP, and hit the link, sign the petition. Also, this is a community-driven campaign. So if you also want to take it a little step further and you want to join the movement and work with us in getting this passed, you can also tap join the team and sign up to volunteer with us.
Is there a deadline?
So when does the budget come out?
So the budget is already out, but a few things are happening right now. Council members are preparing to make their budget wish list. So we've been talking to council members, really asking them to put this on their budget wish list. And so we'll be closing our petitions on June 3rd. That is the day before kind of the budget hearing, where we'll be able to go down and talk to council members about our budget request during a council session.
Okay. I want to thank you all so much for being with us. Again, if you want to get involved, head to smc.org/VSP/office-of-youth-safety. Trust me, it's going to be worth it. Do it. Erica Perry, Jamel Campbell-Gooch, and Mike Floss are all with the Black Nashville Assembly. We will have them back on after the budget is looked at to follow this up. Thank you all so much for being with us.
Thank you so much.
All right, and thanks to you for tuning in this hour. This is Nashville is a production of Nashville Public Radio. Today's episode was produced by Elizabeth Burton. It was directed by Tasha A.F. Lemley. Our technical director and board operators, Liv Lombardi. The masterminds behind our theme music are LaRange and Namir Blade. Maybe next season we can get Mike Floss in that. Listen back at thisisnashville.org or wherever you get good podcasts. And the conversation doesn't end here. Tweet us at This Is Nashville. Find us on Instagram and tell us what you want from our show by filling out our quick survey online. This is Nashville. I'm Khalil Ekulona. We'll see you tomorrow, everybody, and be good to each other.